Hi everybody, welcome to our last day of our BFA Artist Talk series here at the Western Gallery at Western Washington University. We have two painters that we will be talking with today who have completed their BFA projects, and we get to see their full installation today with some additional details. So right now I'm sitting with Ellie, and we're going to be diving into conversation here in a moment, but just to give you a sense of how this looks, Ellie and I will be chatting for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'd like to leave about 10 minutes to look at some questions that you all might have. So as Ellie and I are talking, if you can think of something or you have a question you want to ask Ellie directly while we have her here, we will be doing that live. So go ahead and put that in the Q&A box in Zoom, and my colleague Chris will be taking care of those and will let us know when there's some questions so you can type it in, even if it's in the middle of a conversation, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can go ahead and put this in your questions in the comment box, and we'll be able to come to those towards the end of our conversation. So thanks again for being here. So glad you're able to be here to support our BFA artists who graduated in May. So Ellie is actually graduated, doesn't need to be here right now, and we're really thankful that she is. And congratulations, Ellie, on completing this body of work in such a challenging year. So it has to be a breath of fresh air to see it behind you on the wall. It's up.
Yeah, it's a definite relief, and I'm glad we're able to sit here and have these talks,
Yeah.
Even if it's over Zoom.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So Ellie, we're sitting here with 5 of your paintings that you've decided to be your culminating project for your BFA year. Tell us a little bit what we're looking at. I mean, these are very playful. I know they relate a lot to memory. But for our audience, they see lots of colors, they see lots of objects, but maybe describe one of them to us and break it down a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. This middle painting, Miller, Marb, and I think is a good one to kind of describe a bit. I think it kind of has a lot of the elements that all of them show and kind of portrays what I was going after the most, I believe.
Yeah.
So all of these paintings were made in reference to little assemblages of objects that I curated and then painted from life, as well as used reference imagery to work from as well. Mm-hmm. So while these paintings are 48 inches by 48 inches, a lot of the objects that you see within the paintings are, tiny little knickknacks or little tchotchkes that might be about a couple inches tall. Mm-hmm. These paintings for me do have to do a lot with memory as well as childhood, and I wanted to kind of reference a sense of nostalgia that I feel quite a bit in my young adult life at this point. And so I wanted them to kind of be these really colorful and playful images, but also play with a little bit of a darkness or a little bit of unease as well. Because part of what I find really interesting about sort of like growing up and adolescence and just the journey from childhood to, I guess, where I'm at now, which is just young adulthood, is kind of how tumultuous it can be and how it's not like a linear path, but, you might experience some dark or traumatic things when you're quite young, and that might kind of be something very formative for you. So amongst these sort of more innocent childhood objects or toys, there's some things interspersed, especially in Miller, Marb, and I think there's like a Suboxone wrapper in the bottom corner, and the central figurine is laid atop of a crushed Miller High Life can. So it's referencing some alcoholism or addiction, which aren't things, well, there are things that I think a lot of people experience, and they are things that I wanted to reference, but neither have a huge specific impact on my life. Mm-hmm. There is alcoholism and addiction in my family, and that's what I wanted to kind of draw from, but I wanted to do it in a more vague way that doesn't tie into any specific event or anything like that.
Sure. So what I'm hearing, you have these assemblages of objects that at first seem very playful, mm-hmm. but when one looks at these, upon further looking, you're really seeing this dichotomy of naivety and maturity, or playfulness and kind of erotic imagery in some regards. You're looking at these two contrasting elements and putting them together. And I think there's also something to say about the viewpoint that you've chosen here. It's not necessarily set. Like some people could think of works that are similar to this as like a still life, but it's hard to call these a still life because they seem to be floating within a space, layered on top of each other in different ways. They don't seem to be making up a real space, but then they do. So, you framed them in a very like your backgrounds, right? And you very much exposed the surface of the painting. So maybe we could talk about that for a moment. And I know, Chris, you have a few slides that you could show of these works that show some of the textural quality within the surfaces of these paintings. So talk us through how you've finished these in some regard, right? Like when someone approaches these, some places you can see the panel underneath and some places you can't.
Yeah. I think also what you were just saying about sort of the vantage point as well has to do with that as well, where I didn't want these to be rooted in realism or in an actual sense of, looking down at these objects on a surface necessarily. I liked the idea of them sort of being in this ambiguous, potentially sort of like floating space, or sort of cluttered junk drawer of old, like knickknacks or something like that.
And one that you've controlled.
Yes.
Like it's not something you stumbled upon actually in your childhood, but per se you've been bridging and composing this assemblage.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the sort of various levels of finish that all of these pieces have really was something that I wanted to incorporate to sort of speak to the memory aspect of the themes of my body of work. For me, I think that sort of having some really rough and scrappy edges, or, an area where you can see the ground of the painting and not, the rest of, or not a highly finished area or a super well rendered figurine, but, some differences in texture as well as, areas that are more see-through, I guess, if that's the way to put it. I feel like that kind of, for me, was an attempt to reference sort of the fluidity of memory and how I feel like it's a universal thing of you could remember something from your childhood, some innocuous day where you're at the beach or playing with a bucket in the sand, and you could remember that crystal clear, but then there could be more formative things that sort of slide in and fade out of your memory over time.
Yeah, that's really powerful to think through how you've utilized the textures of the surface as a way to evoke your memory through these objects, and some are hazy, some are clear. I think that's really, really powerful and really communicated through your work, because sometimes you can't tell exactly what the object is and it takes some time, but as you relate it to memory, I think that's really, really strong, really striking about your work. So maybe let's back up a little bit. You started, it feels like forever ago, a year ago, you're just starting your BFA year, fall 2019. You were coming into the year as a painter?
Yes, I was. I was still very new to painting, though. I had only been painting for about a year or so prior. So.
And what were you painting before your BFA year?
Before my BFA, I was still working a lot from sort of a set of objects, and so that's kind of how I knew that I wanted to go in this direction, at least at the beginning of the year. I had a vague idea. I've always loved knickknacks, and I feel like objects for me hold a lot of nostalgia and emotion and very sentimental. So I feel like they can tell a story in a really interesting way without, having any personal identity being shown in them. So I knew that I wanted to do something with objects, but I think at the beginning of the year, I was more into the idea of doing like really, really maximalist compositions. I was really into Mike Kelly, and I had just discovered his Memoryware series, where it's like a bunch of buttons or pins, and it's these huge, huge canvases, and they're all just completely full of tiny little knickknacks. And I thought that that was really inspiring. But I mean, the whole year, the process of working on like a thesis for that long, you're bound to like make some changes throughout the year. And I think that, you know, playing with texture and kind of discovering the ways that I wanted to like mess with the space in the composition was probably like the biggest change for me, throughout the year.
And then what happened when March hit and you weren't able to access the painting studio for some time, and you weren't able to access your paintings? Like, where were you at in your process, and how did that impact you?
Yeah, I was thankfully, I tried to work on all of my paintings at roughly the same time. Some of them were a bit farther along in their process than others. So I did feel, I was at least a little confident that I would have paintings done by the end of the year. But they were all at various levels of finish. And, you know, I think for everybody, March was like a very scary and uncertain time. So I kind of tried to take my mind off of my paintings for a little bit. And I took that as like a little couple-week breather that I needed, because I had been, you know, working very hard all winter. And I think that, you know, having a couple weeks to just kind of breathe and think through the final details that I wanted to really emphasize on the paintings and kind of get them all to a level that I was really happy with, because I feel like a lot of the little details are very important for these, you know, having time to really think through those decisions. And it gave us more time before they would be hung. So it was difficult. And then once we were able to get some access to those studios, it was definitely difficult working alone. I'm definitely like, I need like accountability of having a community and people around me to make sure that like, if I'm in the studio for 9 hours, I'm working those 9 hours. But it was great that we got access at all. And I am happy that we got more time.
In some regard, it was nice to have a little bit of that time. But you made an important point of the BFA year. Usually it's this like really close-knit group that you're always around, and you had that for a bit, but then all of a sudden you're doing virtual critiques with everybody, and everyone's making PowerPoints and trying to show an installation in a PowerPoint, or your paintings, which I don't think you can experience these really virtually. Like, these have to be experienced in person. So that is a major shift of the BFA year. Well, I'm glad you had that time to like think through it and finish these, you know, with a little bit more insight. So something I want to come back to, you know, these objects are personal to you in some regard, but people might not know that. You know, when they look at this initially, some of these objects are very universal, and they're able to attribute different meanings. So with that being said, you know, when some Western students are coming in here, or faculty, and people are coming in and looking at these, what do you hope they're getting from the experience of seeing your work, and what do you think they might take away from it?
Well, my hope in using objects especially was to sort of remove myself from this, because they are personal works and they do say things about myself, but I am glad that it's not super readily apparent to the viewer what it says about me specifically. And I think that the types of objects that I chose could speak to plenty of different people. I feel like, you know, using an old cracked iPhone might sort of signal to a young teenager or somebody from my generation. You know, we were all walking around in high school with like shattered phones. Or, you know, some of these like porcelain figurines, they might reference childhood still to somebody much older because they were vintage finds. But I really want to sort of, through those objects, definitely I think that the viewer would hopefully get the sense of childhood and nostalgia through at least the color palette as well. But you know, with the confusion between the objects, you know, get a sense of unease or something's a little bit off.
Yeah,
That's my
something's
hope.
obstructed
Yes.
through this like combination.
Yeah.
Definitely. So as you've completed this work, have you found yourself continuing to do similar series moving forward, or what do you envision, you know, in the next few years coming back to painting, and what do you see yourself doing? What kind of work? Is it going to be steeped in similar themes or something different?
I definitely think that like just the dichotomy between like childhood and adulthood or growing up is something that is almost like an infinite source of inspiration for me, because as I continue to go through life, I feel like I will, you know, make new revelations about, you know, the growing pains of moving through life. So I feel like that is something that will continue to inspire my work. And I am currently working on some smaller scale paintings, still kind of working from objects and stuff like that. I want to sort of continue on that route, but you know, I'm still a new painter, so I'm still kind of just working on honing my craft. I want to get better at, you know, pursuing realism in some regards, so that when I make those, you know, decisions of realism versus something a little bit more childlike, it's a little bit more honed in.
Yeah. So when you're saying you're a new painter, which I think for some of us, you've completed your BFA year. So for you to say you're a new painter, we're like, kind of, you're pretty experienced. Like you've spent a lot of time with this medium. What were you doing before you were painting? Like, you know, your 4 years of your undergraduate degree.
I mean, I had always been into visual arts. Before that, mainly I stuck to drawing and was very into oil pastels, which I utilized in these paintings as well, but a little bit more of just like a childlike scribble in these. But I had sort of moved from doing a lot of portraiture and stuff like that, graphite, charcoal, and then switched to oil pastel, which was definitely sort of what brought me into painting, because I was kind of learning how to get those like painterly marks and starting to become a lot more into color, which has made a big impact for me, color for sure.
Absolutely. I think color is a huge aspect of your work. And I think you've done a really good job of balancing it in different aspects. And there's something about the reds that I see in your work, you know, in this series, that you continue to have these striking, I don't know, unfinished textures, rough textures, and they're always in red. I don't know, I'm just really drawn to that, you know, this aspect of your work. So I know that we've also talked about moving forward, you're interested in maybe getting an MFA in the coming years. Would you want to continue in painting?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I would think that, you know, something could change my mind at some point. And who knows, maybe I'll find some new medium that I love just as much. But yeah, I would love to get my MFA at some point. I definitely think I need a few years to sort of continue just working and figuring out what I want to do as an artist, and, you know, if these themes are still themes that are inspiring to me, or if I'm pulled in another direction. But yeah, I would love to get an MFA at some point.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I know we've been chatting for about 20 minutes, so I do want to give some time to questions while we have Ellie here with us. So Chris, please go ahead. I know that we do have a question or two.
Yes. So this is, we've got some very articulate statements with questions, so I'm going to read them more or less verbatim so you get the gist of the context. The presentation of these tiny objects as huge can change the context or force the viewer to reconsider these objects and their relation to them. What were you thinking as far as a viewer's engagement with the painting using such familiar objects from both adulthood and childhood?
That's an awesome question. I think specifically speaking on scale of the objects, I think it almost started out as a choice just where I love painting big. I find it much easier. I like getting a bit more gestural and expressive, and, you know, keeps me a bit more lively when I'm painting. But I also think that working with these tiny objects and like blowing up the scale that large was also an attempt to kind of highlight an importance of them and sort of force the viewer into that perspective of kind of this odd space and sort of a lack of realism or a bit of absurdity with them.
Yeah, mundane objects that we might overlook often.
Yeah.
Right, but then you've elevated it on, these panels in a different light. And it's like, oh, I'm going to think about my porcelain bunny a little bit differently now.
Yeah, exactly. That's the hope.
Yeah, but the sentimental value that we all attribute very differently to objects. Like, I know I'm not someone who holds on to my objects, but then I look at what you've created and I'm like, oh, but I actually it's very endearing to see that. And I wish I would be better about, holding on value to these objects. So that's a really great question. The value that you've placed, and you've emphasized that by the scale that you've portrayed these in on the canvas and as a visual artist. Great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, I know we have another one.
And if you're in the audience and you're listening in, and I will sometimes group your questions together if they're thematically similar, or if it's something that we've covered and we have something that we haven't really touched on, I might go to the newer things first. So if you feel like we haven't addressed your question, just make a note of that in the chat. This is I'm going to read the comment and then the question. Over the years that I've known you as an artist, you've become much more experimental in your materials and methods of mark making. Was there ever a breakthrough moment or a piece for you that changed the course of your artistic process? And that was from Emma, if it helps give you a context.
Okay, awesome. Hi, Emma. For me, I think, the classes that I've taken at Western really influenced me quite a bit. And specifically, the 2 times that I took experimental painting here definitely helped me get a lot more experimental. The first time I took it with Cynthia Camlin, that was one of the first times that I had sort of started actually working from like a set of objects instead of just like individual ones. And so that definitely influenced my practice in sort of culminating into what we have here today. But I was definitely working a bit more, trying to achieve a bit of realism back then, throughout the whole composition, not really sort of going between the two like I am now. And definitely experimental painting the second time around with Paul Bernhardt was when I started really sort of experimenting with texture and different mediums and kind of having 2 different visual languages jut up against each other. And, just learning as I've learned to paint, learning about all these different artists that inspire me. Ambera Wellman definitely was somebody that I looked to quite a bit when I was painting these. So that definitely has inspired my evolution at this point so far, I guess. Yeah.
And would you say for those that are watching that are interested in a BFA, the power of the word experiential and experimental and trying different things, like how has that been important for you as a BFA student? Because you've had to push your surfaces. I feel like I can go back to some of the critiques and everyone's very attentive to your surfaces and they're like, you should push this a little bit more, you should do this. But learning to experiment, would you say that that's an important part of?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, if you come into a BFA year where you're planning on doing a sort of year-long project and a thesis, like you might have some set ideas on what you want to do, but you have to be willing to listen to those critiques of like push that farther, or not be too precious with them. Be willing to, like, if you mess it up, you mess it up. And that was definitely something that I struggled with a lot through the year, of kind of letting go of that control. And if I pour paint on one corner of the canvas or the panel, like, it's not the end of the world, but it might bring a new visual language in. And so kind of letting loose a bit was something that I struggled with, but definitely something that helped me as well.
Yeah. So, and I think it's important, like when you were talking about the process of painting that you enjoy is not this like really detailed oil painting where you're looking at like I'm thinking of Northern European, like Dutch still lifes that are just so detailed. But the fact that you want to be more physically engaged with your canvases, it allows for more experimentation.
Yeah.
You know, with your surfaces, like you've clearly been open to that. And not all artists are open to that. You know, they can be very stuck to a certain method or I don't know, but I think specifically when I think back to the critiques of all this feedback that you're getting, which can be pretty challenging because you hear it a lot and you don't agree with what everybody is saying,
Yeah.
but you've clearly clung on to that well, to the good advice or the advice that you've been able to gather, and you did experiment. I don't remember which painting it was, but I remember you were trying to decide how to finish the edges of one of them. And I don't know if, Chris, you have some details of one of the paintings, but I love the oil pastels on the edges of the works, and I just want to reinforce, like that feels very experimental as a painter for you to go back and use oil pastel to outline, you know, some of your objects to give it this childlike surface. I think it's really, really neat. But I do see that we have another question. Go ahead, Chris.
All right. When you were creating these paintings, did the process of creating them connect you to that younger self that you talked about a little bit? And when you were done, when you look at this, what do you take away from the work in this installation?
That's a good question. I definitely at times felt very playful and childlike while I was making these and sort of visiting these objects again. But then there is also the darker side of them as well, where there's some gritty, gross things that I was dealing with as well. So that would equally as affect my mood while I was painting probably. But I think, you know, referencing these toys and childhood objects, you know, helped me be more experimental maybe, like have a little bit more fun with them and scribble on them like a crayon or like a child would with a coloring page, you know. I think that sort of trying to embody that mindset, since it's something that I think about quite a bit, helped me make these works. Seeing them all together in this exhibition is really amazing. And I look at them and I see so much potential for where this sort of idea could continue to go. I'm very proud of how they all turned out, and seeing them all together is really great. But yeah, I think for me it's just sort of inspiring me more to figure out what's next and figure out what body of work could be next and how I could display them. And it's really just kind of keeping me looking towards the future of my painting career, I guess.
Right. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, you know, how your process, how your content has kind of informed the concepts behind your work and who you are. And so now that you have this completed body of work, moving forward, you can always come back to it. You can always take extensions of it. But moving forward, you always have this to look back to. And I think there's something to say too, that this is a completed, you know, process. You've gone through the making and the finalizing and the exhibition part of it. And to see what happens in that holistic process, you kind of get a better perspective moving forward what the potential is for works of art. So it's really exciting to have your work here, Ellie. And I think the color and the playfulness of it is a really great conversation with the rest of the bodies of work in here and inside of New Realism, because we really do step inside of this playful yet uncomfortable in some regards spaces. So congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for your hard work and perseverance in completing this body of work and taking the time out outside of graduating to come and install them to be here. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for your questions. It's been great to have this time with Ellie. And I do hope that you can listen in on our last artist of this series, Shannon. We're gonna be looking at some of her paintings, and we're gonna have just a few minutes as we transition over to the next aspect of the gallery. So we're gonna show you some visuals of Shannon's work in the meantime, and then we'll get started with our last artist talk. So thank you all, and thank you, Ellie.
Thank you all for the questions.
Yeah, okay, we'll see you all in a little bit. Thank you. No, it's okay. Hi, welcome to the Western Gallery as a part of our BFA Artist Talk series at Western Washington University. My name is Tammy Landis. I am museum educator here at the gallery. And we are at our last BFA Artist Talk of this series. It's just been so profound to sit and have these conversations with artists. And last but not least, we're going to be ending with Shannon Delorio today. And I'm so pleased to have Shannon here. And just a note for those of you that may not know, these are graduates. They're done with Western. They were actually done in the spring, but they've come back, completed this body of work, installed it, and now, for example, Shannon's here as a part of our Artist Talk series. So we really want to utilize this time, and thank you all for participating and for being here. And just a little logistical note of how this will look. Shannon and I are going to be in conversation for about 15, 20 minutes. And then I'd love to open the floor to you all for your questions or comments that you might have for Shannon that you can ask about her work. So while we're talking, if something comes up that you would like to know more about, go ahead and put that in the Q&A in the Zoom Q&A box, or if you're watching on Facebook, you can go ahead and put that on the comments. And my colleague Chris will be helping us hear those at the end, so we will be able to come back to those. So please do ask some questions. It's great to have the live audience here with us today. So we're gonna dive right in and explore these 5 canvases that I see here behind me that are Shannon's culminating BFA work. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's done.
It's done.
It's done. It feels like it's been stretched out because of COVID. You know, this exhibition was supposed to be in May, so you were hustling to get it done then, and then we're like, it's going to be in the fall.
Yeah.
So now it's all up, and we're so excited to have it. So Shannon, talk to us a little bit, for those that are watching this. I know Chris does have some slides of some more detailed visuals of your work, but seeing these from far away, everybody might not understand exactly what they're looking at. So break it down for us just a little bit. What are we looking at on these canvases?
Yeah, so you're looking at minuscule compositions of what actually is a miniature model that I've taken reference photos from. So my entire process is I was building a model of my bed, which for me is a really personal thing because it's kind of the home to a lot of mental illnesses I've experienced in the past. So I'm building the model, manipulating the model, and then taking photos and painting from the model. So every image you see is one snapshot of that manipulated model.
It's so fascinating that it's not that and maybe you can walk us through this a little bit, like why not just take a picture of your bed and then recreate that? What is it about recreating this model of your bed and then utilizing that as the stimulus for these paintings. I just think it's really fascinating, the layers that your work goes through, and the idea of you manipulating and controlling an environment and creating a model and then painting that versus your actual bed.
Yeah, it's kind of like a bedception a little bit, I like to say. But yeah, it kind of happened naturally because originally I wanted to take real photos of my bed, but that felt kind of awkward because I'm really referencing events that happened years ago.
Okay.
And so taking photos of my current bed just felt a little bit detached or forced. And I was taking Paul Bernhardt's experimental painting class, and I decided, because in the class, the whole curriculum is based around building a model and then painting from the model in different ways with different artist mentor inspirations, stuff like that. I decided to build my bed because I just was feeling a little bit lost and needed more direction, and I thought that would maybe inspire something, and so that's what I did. And I don't know, yeah, it was a really cathartic experience to build this space that has like a lot of emotion behind it.
Yeah.
And then
It's a really personal space.
yeah, and then to be able to control it was just a very interesting feeling because I don't know, being able to control a space that I previously had no control over, it felt like, was just an interesting experience and something that really informed the entire series, I think. Yeah, just because I want to capture these small moments in my bed where I'm not feeling like myself or feeling different. And I found that in the model. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you've chosen, or I find it really successful in your canvases, that from far away, these could feel abstract. You don't necessarily get a sense of place right away. You can kind of get a sense that it's fabric, but until further looking or reading your artist statement, I don't know if people would know right away that it's a bed. So I love that it's a little hazy, but yet you invite us in as we look further. So maybe talk through, what is it about showing this small moment of a larger bed, but like, for example, the plate with crumbs on it. I feel like that's what we've talked a lot about. And I think it's kind of pivotal in this series of, the imperfections versus the perfection of showing a folded, nice made bed.
Yeah.
Tell us why you've decided on the certain focal point that you have here and these unmade moments or interrupted moments.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, the bed for me is a very foggy, hazy place, filled with just like a lot of random experiences, traumatic experiences. And so I feel like the bed is a really interesting subject for like all of those various things. And I think in each composition, I'm trying to reference those different emotions in very different ways with different colors, different treatment of the surface and the space. So that's kind of what I was after in exploring each composition so differently. But I also didn't want it to feel forced, like not every composition needs to have like a plate or like a central object maybe, or it doesn't all have to be similar. It can be very different or utilize different colors to kind of create those different feelings.
Right, and I remember early on in your critiques, you had different variations of perspectives of the bed, but you've landed on kind of this anonymous, it's not really sure where the angle's coming from, maybe above, maybe tucked right next to, and each of them kind of have a different angle at them, but they feel very intimate and they feel very close. And I think, I want to reiterate, you're talking about the surface quality of some of these. So walk us through some of the variations, maybe something that they can't necessarily see from far away, but if we pull up one in particular, like some of the like wash quality that I see on this, it makes it feel like a stain. Maybe talk us through some of the different textural qualities or surface, that you really manipulated to achieve a certain emotional state, right?
Yeah, so like I think in something like stain here, I'm manipulating the surface in different ways. Like I think in the top right corner, there's a lot more of a gestural quality there, which feels like really alive. But like you move down to the right to the saran wrap, which is like pretty realistic and kind of like works against that space which it's lying directly on top of. And then, yeah, the stain itself is just kind of this weird thing in the middle of the canvas that almost just feels like it was like splatted right on top. So there's just like a lot of layers to it, and I think it mirrors like those experiences you have when you're in like an altered mental state, when you're like in like a depressive episode or like feeling more anxious. Like things start to feel not normal. And I think, I don't know, that's something I wanted to reference a lot in like a subtle way, because I think maybe not everybody would have that interpretation, and I do think that's interesting as well, and I didn't want it to be that obvious.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. How you've manipulated the surfaces speaks a lot to you and your personal understanding of this space. But for someone else to come in here and experience these, they will have a sense of familiarity with these bedscapes that kind of feel like that, because it feels like it could be a landscape and they're telling a narrative in some way. But what do you hope, people to come in here and maybe have gone through similar things or can't relate to things that you've gone through, but to look at these, what are new ideas that are going to be evoked through the gaze that they have of looking at these pieces?
Yeah, I think a bed is something that's universal to a lot of people, or just fabric, a blanket. And I think a lot of people have different connotations with that kind of environment. I think for some people, it can be a really inviting space. And I think in some pieces, it seems a lot more inviting. And I think that was part of what I was referencing, is it's, it has two different sides to it. It's comforting, but it's also a place of immense discomfort for some, maybe in different experiences. But I think there's that. And I think like working with textiles and like pattern is really interesting. And I think, that references just like domestic spaces and like history itself. I think patterns have like a lot of meaning to them, and was interesting to start to explore. I think they kind of like make a space more personal, and I think people connect with that.
Yeah. So for you, looking at these paintings, do they take you to a specific moment or a specific memory per se? Because I know you said this isn't necessarily your bed right now. This is not what you're looking at when you're going back to your place per se, because you wanted to create that model to reenact different moments. So when you look at these, are you drawn to different emotions, different places?
Yeah, slightly. I think, honestly, I wasn't really aware of how personal they were until later on. Just because like the process was like a little more cut and dry, where I'm like examining the model and choosing different compositions. But I felt like later on I realized how meaningful each composition was for me personally, or that I could connect to a lot more.
Yeah, and you're really steeped into the visuals of this. I mean, when you're working on these paintings, the countless hours you spend on them and what you're looking at, you're like immersing yourself in the bed, essentially, to like be able to portray this, to understand the like fabric quality and trying to convey that softness or roughness or whatever, that textural quality is. But it's amazing how something with these colors and simple palette can be so emotional and so personal. So I think you've done a really great job of conveying personal significance in something that we all can look to and relate to, but also in very stunning paintings, very well done paintings that you're accomplishing in these works. So maybe back us up a little bit. Before you started this series of works, before you started your BFA year, or right at the fall a year ago when you were starting your BFA year, what did you think you were going to be making? Were you doing paintings before? How did you come to this series?
Yeah, if I would go back, I would never have guessed this is what I would have created. But I think I came in and I had done a fair bit of painting, like maybe a year or two under my belt. Okay. I didn't feel too experienced, but I felt like I was going to be working more with like organic, like nature type things. I wanted to convey like feelings, emotions, and like just how everybody perceives reality differently. Like that was something I was really interested in. and I painted a bed kind of as like a backdrop of one painting, and just like kind of became aware of how interesting that was, and just like moved forward and continued to explore that. And then worked with the model and started working big. I think that helped a lot in just like opening up and being more gestural and just like focusing in on things too.
Was it hard for you to move to a more gestural process? Like, would you say before you like to control your surfaces?
Yeah.
So very different than our conversation with Ellie before. Ellie liked to work big. So this was a push for you. This was a little experimental for you.
Yeah, definitely. It was a huge push. And I definitely learned a lot in the classes I took. Like taking experimental painting with Paul really helped me to just like open up and like be more playful and lose control. I think like it's something I still want to work on, but I think like that's something I love about art is just the ability as an artist to control something. But I think this year I learned that like a lot of the beauty in art comes from the accidents or just the little like idiosyncrasies that happen when you're not even paying attention.
Yeah.
I think like that's a lot of where like the beauty and truth lies within art. And so I don't know, I feel like that's a big part of my process now is like uncovering that and like painstakingly like telling myself to like step back and like view it as a whole.
So you allowed yourself to open up a bit more in your process and in your technique, and scale and gesture were all a part of that.
Yeah, I think like
process.
It was a relationship. I don't think like I think I still like honed in on control in some areas, but I think I did allow for some gestural areas too. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I can go back to some of the early critiques, and everyone was encouraging you to try different textures and different qualities, and you could sense your hesitation in doing so.
Yeah.
Like, I hear you, but I don't know if I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I think you've found a good balance, because that's hard to funnel all these voices that are coming. I mean, 9 different voices, let alone the group of faculty that are also supervising you. You know, you have a lot of voices that are coming in your BFA year, and you have to stay true to yourself. And stick with what's important to you and what process is important to you, what material is important to you. And you've done that very successfully because you've created a cohesive body of work that is consistent in their nuances, but each one does have something a little bit different, I would say, on the surfaces. You invite a different texture, like the one that's behind me is its stain, the plastic on that. I love that. I feel like I can hear the crunch of it, and I'm thinking about it on a bed, and I'm like brought right to that. It's interesting. When we fast forward through your BFA year, and we get to March with COVID, where does this find you? Like how did you handle, having to navigate not being able to access your work here on campus for a bit, and then where were you in your process? How did that go for you?
Yeah, it was stressful.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much going on in the world, and I think it felt a little weird as an artist. I don't know, it just kind of makes you feel small, or like there's so many bigger things happening. But I think like, again, your passions and personal experience are important too.
Right.
But I think it was stressful because at that point, I think I'd only finished like 3 paintings, and I was hoping for 5 or like even 6. And so I don't know, it really was like a silver lining to be able to have more time. I'm super grateful to all of our staff and team that helped us gain access, and like you and others who worked hard for us to have a show, and like all of that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for all that. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge accomplishment. I mean, for people just to come in and see us sitting here, it's taken a lot to get to this.
Yeah,
to
it
say
the
really
has.
least. But we're happy to be able to do it, and it's
Definitely.
A major kudos to you and your perseverance, because the pandemic is not an easy year to be creating work and finding support to do that. So it's a huge accomplishment. So I see that we're running close on towards the end of our time. I know we have a few more minutes, but I do want to leave some time for questions. So Chris, I see that we have some questions. So go ahead.
Yeah, we've got a few that are all sort of a constellation related to some technique. And so I'm going to group those together, technique and creation of these particular pieces. So I'm going to ask a few, and then maybe it'll be easier to address them all together. So the first one question is, what size was the bed model? Was it life size? How did you achieve the fuzziness and soft nature of the blankets from a technical standpoint? There was a question about choosing the lighting for each painting with reference to the one on, I think it's our left, which is probably the one right behind Shannon. It says it's appears brighter than the rest. So fuzziness of blankets in terms of technique, how do we get that approach? What size of a model did you use for your bed? How did you approach the lighting to each work?
Okay, yeah, thank you for all the questions. So the model itself was only like 1 foot by 1 foot. So like the plate you see in crumbs is like the size of a penny. It's quite small. So that was interesting, like working with size variation was a really fun experience for me. And then in terms of fuzziness of the blanket and like the soft quality, that was something I was really, really after. And I was using like a large mop brush and like kind of like working into the paint a lot to make it appear soft. And then the fuzziness is like, I used either a fan brush or the edge of a large flat to kind of like flick the paint a little bit more. And yeah, some of that comes naturally and like some is more worked in, and those different processes will yield different results. And then the last one was the lighting.
The lighting, yeah, that's
yeah. I think I was manipulating a light source with like natural light, or like sometimes I would take photos of the model in a darker space with like a flashlight, or I don't know, kind of direct sources of light more, like a lamp. But I think this one turned out more bright because I like finally kind of understood how to bring warmth into my colors more, and I think that created a lot brighter of a composition compared to these other ones that still have like areas of warmth, but I think appear a lot more cool, and I think that really affects light source. So yeah, like playing with warmth in colors, even if you're using like blues or cool tones, is possible.
Great.
And then we have a couple about sort of the process and maybe some introspection, which are, what did you learn about yourself through the process from picking the subject up to this moment? And how has your experience spent in bed changed since doing this this work?
That's good. You spent a lot of time thinking about your bed.
I think, yeah, I learned a lot. I've learned a lot about myself over the past couple of years, just in like healing in my own personal ways and like growing as an individual through so many different stages of life. I think like your early 20s are such a transitional period. And like if you go through hardships or like if you experience mental illness, like it makes it really hard. So I don't know, I think this series was just a reminder to me of how far I've come from like those really hard moments in my life and how much I have healed. And like painting itself is a very therapeutic experience. So that was like of great significance to me. I think like art for me is like a processing like emotions and moments and images, like even if they are close to me or farther, everything's just about processing. And then the second question was?
I'm blanking. So it was how do you look at your bed differently?
Oh, right.
How is
my
your bed
bed
different
now.
to you, or do you think about it differently?
Luckily, I feel like my bed is less of a dangerous escape and more of just like a place of healing and relaxation, just because of all the healing that I've experienced. But it definitely was funny to be like painting all day and then like going home to my bed. It's like everything is just bed. So yeah, I think like it'll be nice to step away from the bed for a while and maybe paint other things.
That's great. I was just going to ask you that. I think
Yeah.
Really quickly, I know we have another question, but what do you hope to paint next, like, or think about next as you look at your work and how it'll change?
Yeah. I think like I'm still really interested in just like small moments of like healing. Like I don't know, I have this image of like examining hands on surfaces. Just like, I don't know, when you're sitting on a beach and your hand is like touching like the sandstone at Chuckanut, or like, I don't know, I think there's small moments that can feel really different. Maybe something like that. But I don't know, I am interested in just like zooming in on things instead of like looking at the larger picture details.
Those little intimate moments.
Yeah.
And the hand is very personal. I know that we have another question and then we'll probably need to wrap up. So go ahead, Chris.
I'm watching this on two different screens simultaneously, and sometimes I forget which one I'm looking at.
I know, you're doing great, Chris.
We have a comment that's on the Facebook stream, and I just asked the commenter. It is a public comment, but I just asked them if they wanted me to read it, and I was waiting for a reply. So if we don't get to that, then you can read the comment. It's just a really nice. It's a very nice, very specific comment. For Shannon, so she can read it on the Facebook post if I don't manage to figure out which screen I'm looking at here.
Okay. All right, great. So good to know. Make note of that.
Yeah.
And that should be on the recording, or you can see that at the College of Fine and Performing Arts Facebook. But in closing, you're still here in Bellingham.
Yes.
Are you considering MFA programs? What's next for you?
Yeah, I think I would really be interested in doing an MFA and just continuing my studies and my practice.
Continue in painting?
Yeah, I think so. I really like painting. I think there's a lot of possibility in painting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You've accomplished a really successful body of work. And I think every time I come in here, I see it differently, as with other bodies in this space. But because of the scale, I feel like I see a different detail every time. I see a different moment within the bed, and I think about it differently. So you've really created a captivating subject that relates on so many different parallels, but especially that it's steeped for you as a very personal narrative. So I think this is going to be a significant body of work that carries you forward for some time. So I'm excited to see how it unravels and how it changes, moving forward for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Shannon. Thank you all for participating, for being here, for supporting these BFA artists. And I do hope you spread the word about the exhibition and these videos. They will be available on our YouTube channel or possibly our Facebook feed. But we hope to have these available soon so then you can share and help promote the great work that these artists have been doing. So just a reminder, we're at the Western Gallery at Western Washington University. And this exhibition is called Insight, A New Realism. And if you do want to know more about the exhibition, there is a digital catalog available on our website at the Western Gallery's website for Western Washington University. And you can see artist statements, curatorial statement, and other great visuals of the work to dive in a bit more. And if anyone has any questions, my name's Tammy Landis. You can contact me. And if you have questions for the artist, I can help relay that to the artist and connect you with them directly. So thank you all again for being here. It's been a pleasure to share these artist talks with a wide variety of audience from all over. And Shannon, thank you for being kind of the cherry on top, the end of our, our series. And this has been a great time. And thank you again, everybody. And I hope that you stay well. And hopefully before you know it, we'll all be able to be back in the gallery again. Thanks.